You are now listening to a podcast made in collaboration with the Copenhagen College Radio.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to episode 78 of the Social Media and Politics podcast, bringing you expert insights into how social media is changing the political game. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, political scientist at the University of Copenhagen. Connect with the show on Twitter by following us at SMNP Podcast and swing over to our website, socialmediaandpolitics.org. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Brian Lyle to the show. Brian is a vice president of digital strategy for On Message Inc., which is a right-wing political consulting firm dealing with everything from creative to social media buys, really just the whole package. And Brian recently won the 2019 Polly Award for Digital Strategist of the Year for his work in the 2018 U.S. midterms. Now, the Polly Awards are an industry award that's given by the American Association of Political Consultants. So it's a really prestigious award, and I'm thrilled to have Brian on the show to talk about the campaigns that he's worked on that helped win that award. And those are some campaigns that, especially if you're an American or you're into U.S. politics, you will definitely be familiar with. So one is the Senate race between Florida Governor Rick Scott, who challenged Bill Nelson for his Senate seat and won in a super narrow election that came down to a manual recount. Another is between Republican Josh Hawley and Democrat Claire McCaskill from Missouri, which was a race that just really took off after the Brett Kavanaugh hearings and the controversy surrounding that. And then the third was a congressional race in Minnesota, where Republican Pete Stauber picked up a seat that had long been held by a party associated with the Democrats, the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, one that I didn't know existed until I was doing research for this episode. But anyways, picked up a seat. All three of these campaigns were massive in terms of fundraising, and particularly the two Senate races that we're really going to focus on in this episode were just so much covered in the media, so important for the Republican Party. All three of the campaigns that we're going to talk about had Donald Trump come down and campaign for the Republican candidate. So we talk about what that means in terms of social media strategy. And then we go outside and we talk about websites and website development, because On Message Inc. won another Polly Award for best website for Rick Scott's campaign in Florida. And Brian has been working in the political communication game for over 20 years, starting with, the IT side and website development, database infrastructures, and those sort of nuts and bolts architectures that drive the modern campaign as we know it today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Lyle. He is the Vice President of Digital Strategy for On Message Inc. and winner of the 2019 Polly Award for Digital Strategist of the Year. Brian, thanks for taking the time out and coming on the Social Media and Politics podcast.
I'm so happy to do it. Thanks for having me on.
So first things first, congrats on the Polly Award.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And I have some questions later on about the campaigns that won you that recognition. But first, in checking out your bio, you've been in the political strategy game for over 2 decades now. So going back to the beginning, how did you get involved working as a political strategist and then more specifically a digital strategist?
Yeah, so I was always interested in technology. So in college, took a lot of jobs working in the technology field, everything from learning new computers and what was being sold from Best Buy to working for Bell South's DSL service and learning how the technology works over the internet. And then after I graduated college, was very interested in politics. And so I started volunteering on a campaign that was down the road from my house. And so from there, I kind of worked from becoming an IT person into more of a digital marketer. And so back then, my campaign manager came into my office and said, "Hey, you know a lot about computers. We've got this thing called a website. It needs to be updated. So you figure it out," and left. So I figured out how to write HTML code, took classes, taught myself in many areas. And at the end of that election cycle, Campaign and Elections magazine wrote our website as being one of the top 5 mold-breaking websites of the cycle because of the innovative things that we had on there, video and other stuff. So I thought, well, I've got something here. This is pretty cool, and worked my way up to working for the RNC during the 2004 election cycle. and went from there to different committees. And it's really transformed from being, back in the 90s, it was more IT related type of field. In the mid 2000s, they came up with a name called the E campaign, which was really the first step of becoming a digital strategist. And with all of the technology changes, it's really transformed from being, I ran my first ad in 2001 where I would have to call a publisher and send them display ads directly, to now, having these great tools from DSPs and DMPs and things like that, where I can load all my creative and all my data into one place and hit almost the entire internet.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and leads well into my next question, which is, you're in a great spot to talk about the role of social media, particularly in campaigning. And so I guess there's that ad placement part of it, but with social media coming on the scene about a decade ago, I mean, what impact has it had on your work, and has it been a game changer?
Yeah, complete game changer. So email has always been king since day one. Everyone always wanted to get an email address. But when social media came along, it went from people just commenting on blogs to all of a sudden there was a place where all your grassroots supporters could get together and start to organize, not only around your campaign, but organize themselves to go out and do something on behalf of your campaign. So that was a big deal. And then, of course, once platforms like Facebook and Twitter and others started to introduce advertising, then to be able to message all those people who didn't necessarily know about your campaign and being able to reach them, test your messaging at a very low cost, very quickly, has really just changed how digital works. Before, it was a grind to raise money online. Now you can constantly iterate your advertising and then scale appropriately when you find a message that works. And that was just took much longer back before social media.
Yeah, and I want to hone in on some examples from the work you did in the midterms. But first, can you tell me a little bit about the company you're working for, On Message Inc.? I mean, there's so many of these digital consultancy firms, the left and the right. What's OMI's selling point, or what sort of sets it apart?
Well, On Message is more than a digital agency. It's actually a political consulting firm. We make ads, and so we make the best ads in the business. And those ads go more than just digital. They go on TV as well. And essentially, all of our partners here and members of the team are consultants on campaigns that we help craft the message for that campaign. We have a polling team, and so one of our founding partners, Wes Anderson, was just recognized as Pollster of the Year. So we start with going out and running polls and figuring out what's the best message for a campaign, and then we turn that into an ad. And then that ad will be placed on TV or on digital or on the radio, depending on where the audience is and where we're most efficient. But I would say we're more than just a digital firm. We're a media firm. And I think that's where a lot of firms today are going, is getting out of just being digital and having to be able to advertise on more platforms, whether it be TV, radio, or digital.
Yeah, and that's something, I mean, so I'm over here in Europe and, we've got the European elections coming up for the European Parliament, and they seem to be a step behind American campaigns when it comes to campaigning. I don't think they integrate that polling element, which I think is digital is one thing, but it integrates into this whole ecosystem, right? I think polling is the core of that. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got to know where your constituency stands, where your audience stands, and what type of messaging is going to work. And so that's just all part of early on testing to figure out what message is going to work and why it's going to work and what you should scale and what you should stay away from.
And does what's the kind of process when you're thinking about your polling questions? Are you starting with polling and going to digital, or can you run digital ads to help inform your polling better? Or does it kind of work both ways?
It kind of works both ways. Polling is definitely it's more helpful to have that at the start. There's a lot more you can do when you've seen responses to polling questions. It allows you to start to formulate creative off of those questions and then go out and do testing online. And then, of course, we deliver that back to the campaign, in which that informs the next poll in some cases. So it does definitely work both ways, but it always helps to have that polling first.
Cool. So let's dig into some of these nuts and bolts of the some of the midterm campaigns. And so, as I mentioned in the introduction, you won this Polly Award for Digital Strategist of the Year, and 3 campaigns were highlighted for that award, and that was 2 Senate races, Rick Scott and Josh Hawley, and then Pete Stauber's congressional run. My first question is, was there a common approach across these 3 races that was particularly noteworthy to win such a prestigious award?
Yes. So our digital team, we really focus on 3 capabilities. So advertising, which I've talked a bit about, and then the social media side, organic social media side, helping these candidates really get their personality out online, and then online fundraising. And so we take this 3-pronged approach. We really start working on building up prospective donors on these campaigns, so that when we get closer to election time, we can turn those prospects into actual donations. We also, obviously are iterating on advertising throughout. And so with Rick Scott, we were very focused on finding cord cutters, so people who we couldn't reach on television, people that were difficult to find online, but were watching TV through platforms like Hulu and Roku and some of these others. And so
this OTT.
Yes, over the top television and connected TV. And so we really focused on those. We ran a great test through the Google platform to find people that we suspected were cord cutters and to be able to advertise to them, and showed that we had a significant lift with cord cutters because they weren't seeing all the clutter that was on TV. They were just seeing our ads for the first time, and they weren't seeing necessarily our opponent's ads or just all the hundreds of other political ads that were out there during the time, especially in Florida. So being able to find this audience and advertise to them, it seemed to make a significant difference. And then we use that across other clients as well. So we would take that same concept and apply it to Missouri and to Minnesota.
I was just going to say, it's super interesting, this OTT, over the top campaigning. So what you're saying is that, like, let's say in a state like Florida, where people are just getting bombarded with ads, was there a sort of first adoption strategy and innovation that maybe your opponents weren't using OTT? So that really gave you a sweet spot to hit a segment of the population that wasn't getting bombarded with ads, but was only seeing yours on streaming devices.
Well, it was more that Florida had much wider scale, right? Mm-hmm. So Florida is essentially 5 different states into one, several different media markets and a large population. And so it allowed us, because there was such scale there, it allowed us to go out and start to test this concept, go out and find those people. And once we did and realized we were having success with it, we were able to use that across the board.
Interesting. So you've got this three-pronged approach: ads, organic, fundraising. Was there a difference in terms of, you have 2 Senate races and a congressional race? I mean, are there any difference in the dynamics there between the 2 different offices?
Absolutely. Scale being the biggest thing. So obviously you're going to have bigger budgets on the Senate side, and the scale from a congressional race to a statewide race allows your advertising to work better, right? You're able to hit a lot more people with your advertising. Mm-hmm. And then see what works quickly and iterate from there. You're able to build up bigger organic followings because you can advertise statewide, or you can reach out statewide to get that organic following behind you. Most of the time, so Florida and Missouri being such big Senate races, nationally, we could go out and look for prospective donors, but because those states are always high profile election states. They have very good donor bases there statewide. And so we're able to really hone in on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe for some of our non-American listeners, I mean, these were massive, massive races. They were all in the media, obviously key states, but also the sort of dynamics. I mean, the Florida race ended up being so close. So you mentioned sort of in-state and perhaps out-of-state donors being important there, but I wanted to ask about these mega Senate races. I mean, obviously the budgets are bigger. Is there anything else? I'm thinking, is access to earned media, for example, easier because these are such politicized and mediatized events?
Yes and no. I mean, nothing's easier on a high-profile race like that. Like I said, Florida is essentially 5 states in the one, and so there's a lot more earned media opportunities there. But you have to be more efficient with every dollar you spend. So just because you have more money doesn't mean you just get to just waste money.
Right.
It just means that you have to really be a lot more efficient and be a lot more careful with where you're spending those dollars and scaling, because it's so important that if you're wasting money that could have gone somewhere else in a close election like we had in Florida, that could have been easily the reason why the election could have taken a different turn, and we could have lost the race if we weren't being careful with those dollars. So, and a lot of this, you can try a lot more tactics, which is nice when you have these bigger budgets in these high profile states. But you really got to be careful and efficient with your dollars.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I want to hone in on these 2 Senate races because they were so big, where both Senator Scott and Senator Hawley were challenging sitting incumbents. And I saw on Message's website, and you said you guys make the best ads. I agree. This was a great ad that basically stated that nobody elects more Senate challengers than on Message. So I wanted to ask, how do races between incumbents and challengers differ, particularly in terms of digital?
Yeah, we've been fortunate over the last 10 incumbent Democratic senators to lose. We've had 6 of those wins. So, and digital has played a key role in a lot of those. You can take more chances as a challenger typically than you can as an incumbent with messaging and all that. You do have to, as a challenger, you do have to be efficient with your dollars and make sure that you're not wasting anything, as well as when you're going against an incumbent, digital becomes a little bit better of an option at the beginning of a race, because you've got to make some noise, and you can do that fairly inexpensively online. Whereas if you're doing a TV buy, those are obviously take a lot more money to do at the beginning of a campaign. So you can make a lot of noise online to start with and gain some momentum. And then when you do have the money that comes in to be able to run a TV ad, having your digital campaign to amplify that TV ad then goes a long way.
Right. This is something that I know academics like myself who are studying this are super interested. We call it the sort of challenger effect, that they're more likely to adopt new technologies and stuff like that. But and I know from other digital strategists who've come on the show that every race is different. But do you think overall incumbents or challengers are at an advantage? And I ask because traditionally in the sort of political science, aspect of things, we think that the incumbent has the advantage generally because they're well known, they're probably better funded. But I think as we see these more challengers come into office, taking the presidency, we just saw in Ukraine a complete political outsider come into the presidency. Do you think that dynamic is maybe shifting?
I think message matters, and that's what we always say here. And so whether you're an incumbent or a challenger, your message, if your message is working, then you're going to have a lot of success, and people are going to want to get on board your campaign. So I think that makes the biggest difference. Of course, money is a huge factor as well, and incumbents typically start out with a lot more money than a challenger does. And so being able to start early really favors an incumbent and can really help them go a long way. So I would always say incumbents are very much better suited to win a race, but challengers are more fun because they can absolutely disrupt and, like you stated a moment ago, try new technologies and take more chances online. And you're starting to see that because digital is playing such a bigger role in these campaigns. You're starting to see challengers take more chances and put more money into digital, which is gaining momentum, and why you have these outsiders that are able to make noise like this.
Right, right. Well, speaking of outsiders, so all three of the campaigns that you worked on in 2018, Rick Scott, Josh Hawley, Pete Stauber, they all had the support of Donald Trump, who came out and rallied for the candidates, if I'm not mistaken. So I wanted to ask, from a sort of messaging or digital strategy standpoint, how did that affect the campaign? I mean, was there a push behind promoting those events? Or, that's kind of a big deal. And I mean, obviously with this president, it's a huge amount of media coverage. So what was that dynamic like?
Oh, it was a very big deal, and took a lot of planning on our part to make sure we maximize when the president came to town and did a rally. One of the great things about Facebook, and it's really where our interests with Facebook align the most, is with doing a Facebook Live. So essentially, we can be our own media company. These campaigns can, and do video directly to their audience of these campaign rallies. And another big piece on the organic side of things is we've talked to our clients about making sure that they were getting photos of what was happening behind the scenes from their perspective. Josh Hawley did this a great job of, he got in he was in the president's limo, the Beast, and actually took a picture inside the Beast and put that up on his social media, which I thought was fantastic. And that picture ended up going viral. Pete Stauber, the night before the rally with President Trump, actually put a poll up on Facebook holding up two different ties and asked his audience which tie should he wear to go meet the president. That was a great post as well. So with all of that organic social media, with getting Facebook Lives and the behind the scenes of what was going on at these rallies, that brought in a lot more of an audience into these campaigns, which then turned into prospective donors around these rallies. So fundraising went up and during this time as well. So we were able to capture all that momentum from those rallies. So they were a huge help for sure.
Interesting. I have a question on this poll, sort of Facebook poll. I'm wondering, because on Instagram stories, you can add a poll, for example. I think that's kind of one of the ways that you can use the features of the platform in a way that's innovative. So let's say you do this poll on Facebook about which tie to wear. I mean, is that giving you some sort of extra data about who's really, a core supporter? Like, is there something about these polls or these kind of sentiment emoji gauges you can put on Instagram that's a way to segment your audience? Or, it seems that you could do that.
So, it would be nice if it was a little bit more scientific of polling, but it's not. What it does do is it helps with grassroots engagement. Right. So when people are taking these polls, and then you're able to know that they're going to see your posts more often. Right. You're going to show up in their feeds more often, meaning that you're going to be able to target them and get them to do a lot more grassroots actions, and maybe even turn into prospective donors down the line. It doesn't give you, Facebook used to give you a lot more data on people than they do now, and rightfully so. Because of privacy concerns, they've started to turn off a lot of those features. But I think it's really helpful, like I said, with engagement, but not necessarily going to inform scientifically what direction your messaging should go.
Gotcha. Interesting. All right, I want to make maybe a lateral move here and talk about another poll that on Message One, which was for Rick Scott's campaign, and that was for best website. And I know that in your career, you've been an expert in website development for campaigns. So I wanted to ask, what makes a good campaign website, and what was so special about Rick Scott's?
Yeah, usability is a keyword, and I know that's kind of broad, but I think looking back at how websites have have transformed. Now you want to make sure that that website gets that user where they want to go on their phone, on their tablet, on their laptop, and what have you. If they're coming to your website to donate, you want to make sure that you are driving them directly to that donation page and getting that conversion as quickly as possible. If they're coming to your website to view a bio, which is outside of the homepage, a bio page is always going to be the second largest traffic site on these campaign websites. You want to drive them to that as quickly as possible so they can learn more about the candidate, and then hopefully they like what they see, and then drive them to a donation page or a sign up to volunteer page. So it's really about funneling people where they want to go. If they want to see the latest news, funneling there and making sure it's as usable as possible. Rick Scott, we did lots of innovative things on the grassroots side of things. We were constantly updating the site with news, what was going on, getting people to fall into coalitions and sign up, and giving them actions to do from there. And then in some cases, we did where things news-based regionally. So if they were signing up in southern Florida, Miami area or things like that, we tried to drive them more specific news to the region they were in. If they were on the Panhandle, we wanted to get them more news related to the Panhandle.
That's interesting because, as you mentioned, Florida is these different sort of regional areas within the state.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting. All right. So this question, it's kind of related, but when I'm teaching my class on political campaigning, I like to show my students the first websites from the Clinton and Dole campaigns in '96, which are just hilarious to look at now. But looking back at those, I mean, you can really see how far websites have come. And, I wanted to ask, what are some of the key changes you've observed over 20 years? So we've just talked about, the cutting edge of what's going on. But I mean, you have a background in IT. I mean, how have you been keeping up with these, really drastic changes if you go back and look at the old ones?
Yeah. It's funny is during that time, the RNC's website was one of the top 10, maybe top 20 most trafficked website during that time period. I think there's a list I have from USA Today of all the top websites, and it's search engines and the RNC's website, which is, to think about that today, that a party committee's website could be as heavily trafficked as a Google or some of these others is really interesting to see where we've come from. Now, what's changed about websites over the years is you had back then in '96, you had everyone had dial-up, right? So you didn't have big pictures, you didn't have a whole lot of video. Your backgrounds were just solid colors and things like that, and putting a credit card into a donation page was still kind of a scary thought to some people of, where's that credit card information going? So a lot of that has changed over the years to being, now it's big pictures, it's lots of video, it's pulling in your social media feeds. So these websites all have the same information. You can find what the candidate's putting out all in one place, and then apps have obviously changed the game as well. If you can get your app downloaded on someone's phone, then you're able to message them on that device where they live most of the time. So it's really changed from being a place where you just throw up a bunch of press releases and a bunch of news and hope people show up to now you're trying to get them to visit you in as many places as possible, whether it's on their phone or their laptop, and really integrate into how they use media daily.
Interesting. Also, that you mentioned apps, and we've talked to a couple of these companies that are developing apps and this sort of P2P messaging. I mean, were you using apps for all those campaigns?
We did. In some cases we did, not all of them, but we definitely used peer-to-peer text messaging and then actual blast email and text messaging apps as well.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I want to ask you about this sort of organic follower base. So you talked about, organic reach being important. I was reading this article from the AP about the Florida Senate race, and it was sort of comparing the candidates along how many Twitter followers they had. And, this candidate has the advantage on Twitter. This one's got the advantage on their official page, but not their personal page. And so I was curious, like, as a strategist going in, I mean, how important are those sort of raw follower numbers? Does that play a big role, or is it more about just paid advertising these days?
It does not play a big role. It's more of a yard sign war, right? So it's like how many yard signs are in a neighborhood. Is what I compare how many followers you have on Facebook or Twitter. Using advertising, you can reach all the voters you need to. So having that organic following is not necessarily important to pay for. But if you do social right, if you are posting on a regular basis and posting interesting content that is actually interesting to your audience, that's going to grow. And that's why you see the difference in campaign followings versus these official side followings, because candidates are going to do a lot more personal information. They're going to do a lot more interesting and messaging and probably a little bit more hard hitting than the policy stuff that they're going to post on their official pages. And then, again, you have campaign dollars to build up and advertise. And when you're doing all these advertising on Facebook, let's say, you're going to have a lot of spillage from that advertising to come over to your Facebook page and hit follow, or just directly on that advertisement, hit follow. So you're going to build up that list there. Whereas on the official side, you're not doing those advertising campaigns in quite that way.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you about differences across platforms. And I think we've kind of got Facebook and Twitter down in terms of what they're used for. Twitter for journalists, Facebook for advertising and whatnot. But I'm curious about something that's platforms that aren't really discussed so much, like Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat. I mean, where do you see those sorts of platforms that, journalists are always writing about Facebook and Twitter, but what about the other ones? I mean, which other platforms besides those do you think are useful for a campaign?
So I think Instagram is great, especially if you have a lot of high quality pictures. It's great for your brand. And so if we can get our clients to really buy into Instagram, it helps out because they end up realizing that they want the imagery there has to be so much better, and they have to work on it, which is great. Mm-hmm. And it helps for ads and everything down the road. YouTube is great for putting your advertisements on, your video ads on. And one of the things that we found that's very important on YouTube is titles and descriptions and tags. YouTube is the second most used search engine on the internet, and it has millions of voters every day searching for all sorts of content. And so if your tags and descriptions and headlines aren't very well written, people aren't going to find it. And what's nice about if you do have everything tagged properly is that you get a lot more views on these videos that you don't have to pay for, which is great. So, those two, I would say there's definitely a lot of use for campaigns.
Curious question. When you're tagging your YouTube videos and you're doing your descriptions and your titles, do you ever put in your opponent's names or things that would, issues that your opponents cares about in the tags in order to drive traffic there?
Well, if the video is talking about our opponent, absolutely, we want to make sure that they're tagged. If it's talking about an issue that's related to the campaign, we're going to make sure that we have every type of tag that's related to that issue that people could possibly be searching for. You want to think about it more from the user perspective of someone searching on YouTube than just, hey, these are the words that are said in this ad, so we're only going to put these words in tags. You want to think about what the user is actually searching for.
Right. All right, couple last questions for you. I want to ask you briefly about 72-hour voter contact programs because you've done a lot of work in this area. How does message strategy differ in that sort of get out the vote time window, and what's the role of social media in that strategy?
Yeah, that's really a great time for your social media to help, right? So throughout the entire campaign, we should have been building up our audience and building up messaging and posts on social media. And you have that last 72 hours, and it's even can be extended now to that last week or so, maybe the last 2 weeks, where especially with early voting, you want to push all those people to not only go out and vote. And so you can now, post your get out and vote on election day, or go out and vote early at these locations, but get them to start getting their friends and messaging their friends to go vote. Because the people that you haven't reached, or people who don't care about politics or just don't pay attention until the last few days, that's really the time to turn on those people and reach out to them. And so using those audiences that you've built up, that's the time to do it. The advertising, your messaging absolutely changes from persuasion, trying to tell people why they should vote for you, to, hey, go vote. Now's the time, and and you want to again push people to the places where they need to learn information about where they need to vote and when they can vote, and then get them there and follow up to find out if they've done it. And if they have, that's great. And if they haven't, continue to message them until they do.
And earlier you had mentioned that, even though, let's say, a Senate race has a big budget, you got to be, frugal with your dollars and sort of, place them well. Is this 72-hour window a time when everything that's left just gets spent, or is it different than that?
Yeah, it's a very dynamic time because Republican campaigns typically get money late. And so you have to make sure that you have fully funded all the different types of campaign apparatuses that you have. So if you are on TV, if you do have a ground game, if you are doing phone calls, you got to make sure that you're fully funding those. So there is going to be a point where you can't spend any more dollars on TV that final week. Once that happens, obviously, because you can turn dollars around so quickly online, you're going to have a lot of extra dollars come in that last week to digital, which is helpful. And so we always plan for that and make sure that we're ready to be able to handle, and we're always informing our campaign managers, hey, we can spend, maybe another $10,000 or $20,000 here. But if you get more than that, that needs to maybe go to another tactic outside of digital.
Right, because the sort of airwaves and the broadcast television, those will be booked, right?
Right,
okay.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So looking ahead to 2020, which, campaigning is well underway, at least for the Democrats, what are some of the key trends in terms of digital that we should look out for?
I think peer-to-peer text messaging is going to continue to grow, for better or for worse. So you're going to start getting a lot more text messages from campaigns, and that's going to be a big to be able to personalize what you send to someone's phone is going to be very important. Advertising through in premium locations like we talked about earlier on OTT connected TV places where cord cutters are more prevalent, and that I think reaching out that's only going to get more important as we go along. And with the news that some of these platforms like Hulu are minimizing the amount of advertisements they have in between breaks, that's only going to get tighter and be more important. So we always, so I think premium locations online to advertise where you're breaking through the clutter is going to be a much bigger trend, rather than just going out and advertising everywhere you can and spraying and praying. So those two areas, text messaging and premium ads, I think are the biggest.
Hmm. Now, my last question for you has to do, I'm just curious about this, which is kind of like work opportunities for Democrats and Republicans based on who the president is. So we have a Republican president who's likely to be pretty much unprimaried. And I'm wondering how that affects the sort of job opportunities for political strategists, because in the last, presidential election, there were 17 candidates. So there was just tons of, room for staffers and whatnot. I mean, is that anything that's considered? I know it's a little bit of a bubble, this sort of political strategy groups in DC. And I know there's down ballot races, but does it matter? Are there less opportunities for political strategists on the Republican side in 2020 because there's maybe less people running?
For long-term digital strategists, sure. You're not going to need as many digital directors. You're going to need a lot more junior level staffers that can help out with labor rather than a whole lot of strategy at the top. So yes, that's absolutely going to be the case. But the great thing about having an incumbent president running for re-election is that everyone's going to coalesce around major technologies. So whether it be the donation platforms or the data platforms, right now, everyone who's running a campaign is going to start to use one type of infrastructure that's really going to help them learn what's working and what's not, and kind of share across the Republican Party. Whereas on the other side, you have, however many Democrats it is now, 20 or so that have announced that they're going to run for president. They're all going to be using different technologies on their campaign. And so eventually you're not going to, that's not really going to help down ballot as much as it will on the Republican side.
So basically like sharing experiences versus being in competition.
Right. Exactly.
Interesting. Yeah. Very cool. Well, Brian, thanks so much for taking the time out. This has been super insightful.
Well, I appreciate you having me.
I've just been speaking with Brian Lyle, Vice President of Digital Strategy for OnMessage Inc. And that'll do it for this episode of the Social Media and Politics Podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. And just a heads up, I've got a bit of traveling coming up the next month or so. So if the releases get a bit sporadic, don't worry, pods are coming. Make sure you're subscribed to get those episodes directly into your feed. I'm your host, Michael Becerra, signing off from Copenhagen. See you next time.